Hello everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. Today we're back on the subject of bourbon and I can finally review this stuff. Rabbit Hole Heigold Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, non-chill filtered at 47.5%. Now before we actually drink the whiskey, a few things about Rabbit Hole. If you go to their website, you can find some information about why the owner of the company made it, what their ideas are. Couldn't really find anything too genuinely promising as to why it's called Rabbit Hole and why they've chosen to do some of the things they've done. So a lot of spiel, not a lot of information if I'm being brutally honest. But here we have one of 4 expressions I believe they make. And the mash bill for this is 70% corn, 25% malted German rye and 5% malted barley. They do go on in a good way about how it's non-chill filtered. Chill filtration is pretty standard for bourbon in most capacities, except with sort of bigger cask strength stuff, but sometimes it can still be chill filtered. And yeah, it's called Heigold because it's named after a German stone cutter who moved to Kentucky, Louisville specifically. I've not been in Kentucky for 4 years, but I did walk past this distillery. I chose instead to go to Old Forester because it looks like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but for whiskey. And this is a sort of genuine small batch style too. There's only 15 barrels per batch, which, you know, genuinely small. You can start using actual words like artisan and things like that with something like this. Love the label design on this. Obviously, I don't know if it's deliberate or not, but they've taken some cues from Johnny Walker with that angular label. And I actually quite like the bottle shape too. Again, there was no info as to why the bottle is shaped like this. I'd like just a bit more info about that and why the distillery is called Rabbit Hole. I suppose they might be going down a rabbit hole of adventure for different grain types and things. Anyway, excuse me. But yeah, you can spot this on a bar from a mile away, which is a good thing. 47.5% alcohol, also a good thing. I picked this up for £50 a bottle, which I do still. That's a pretty good price, especially for something new that is a genuinely higher strength and not just a new sort of 40%, 43% alcohol bourbon. On the website, they do also state that it is above 3 years old. Now, bourbon nerds, of which I used to be one, but I've forgotten a lot. I'm pretty sure with Kentucky Straight Bourbon, if it is under 4 years old, you do have to state how old it is on the label. The website on this states it's over 3. So again, a little bit more vagueness. I'm not happy with all that in full detail, but nonetheless we can assume this is older than 4 years old. But I bought this just because it looked interesting. I've not genuinely looked at bourbon as like a product for a while. There's been so much happening with Scotch whisky and Irish whisky and even European whisky, which hopefully should arrive at some point, that I've just kind of ignored bourbon, which is, I think, is bad because it's kind of my true sort of die-hard love for whiskey started with bourbon, and still does sort of go on to this day, even though I've forgotten many rules. But here we are, Rabbit Hole Heigold. Let's smell it, let's taste it, let's see what's going on. I mean, it's been open for about a week, and I've had a couple of glugs out of it and made the odd cocktail with it. But I will say, and I said this when I first opened it too, for something which is 25% rye, that is not a particularly intense nose. That's really soft and delicate. Don't get me wrong, there are still classic bourbon notes in there. You still get some toasted oak, you're still getting vanilla and caramel. It's really nice, like toasty vanilla. It's like a dessert trolley of warm desserts kind of coming past you. There's honey, a little bit of black pepper, I should say. And some really nice, quite specific, I don't know if it's the Heigold German thing making me think about Inglourious Bastards, but there's almost like an apple strudel note to it. You can smell like flaky pastry, some sort of like soft fruity filling. It's leaning towards a green fruit, so I'd lead with apple. Some nice nutty notes in it too. Almond I've never found as a particularly powerful smell or flavour in general compared to some of its other sort of nutty brethren. But with this one, you are getting a huge hint of almond and like almond caramel. All backed up with those classic toasty wood, toasty vanilla notes. It's lovely. It smells like a really good quality bourbon on the nose. Let's taste it. Okay, things start to switch around a bit now. You taste rye. You absolutely taste rye. The first initial hit is very savoury. Kind of get hit with this like nutmeggy, sage, herbaceous kind of cooking spice thing. That's really unexpected. The rye kind of filters through that as well. It's bringing caraway, a bit of cinnamon. The vanilla, the caramel, the almondy thing too, the honey. Very prevalent on the finish. Quite a lot of honey actually. It feels quite thick. Very sort of full. Not just one of those little off notes you get from a bourbon where it's like, oh, it tastes a bit like honey. No, I feel like I've like just swallowed a big chunk of chewy caramel. Coming through that, some sort of greener wood notes. It feels a bit fresher, like freshly cut. There's something really weird happening with the pepper in this too. Yeah, literally just before I swallow it. There's interesting counterplay between those honey caramel notes and black pepper, and they kind of try and fight each other. On the second sip, the finish becomes even more savoury. Like the 25% rye content in a bourbon anyway, it's pretty high. And most bourbons are using between sort of 8 to 14%. So this is literally double what an average bourbon would use on the high end compared to a rye whiskey, which can be between like 51 to 70, sometimes 95, sometimes 100% rye. Yeah, the smell is all bourbon, but the finish is very strong with these herbaceous, earthy rye notes. Money-wise, is an interesting bottle for the purchase. If you put your sort of supermarket leaders to one side of things like the whole Jack Daniel's range and Woodford Reserve, bloody hell, what else is in? You can find Eagle Rare and Sazerac Rye in supermarkets now, which I find pretty upsetting. If you put all those to one side and you've tried all of those, this is a pretty interesting, genuine small batch product with a higher alcohol level, with an interesting mash bill. And by all means, the one good bit I actually found on their website, that sounds very scathing, but I just wanted to know more detail but couldn't find any anywhere. If you go onto their website, there's a full breakdown of the mash bills, the cast selections of every single one of their products. That I thought was very good. I feel more brands should do that. And it is quite a long finish. I can still taste it now that I'm talking to you. I really liked it when I first opened it. Then like the lack of general info on the website. The information about the whiskey on the website is great, but the general lack of information about history, origin, all that kind of thing. Because this place was established in 2012, so it's 11 years old as of this year. You thought there'd be a little bit more kind of panache with the detail. It doesn't affect my score too greatly either, which is good, because you can't really have a score affected because I don't like a lack of detail on a website when all the information about the whiskey is there. So I really should get that out of my head a little bit. Overall though, very nice style. I think I would give that like a 7. It's a really good whiskey, if you're looking to spend a little bit more for a smaller amount of product in terms of a batch, I think this is fantastic for that. I would really like to try their wheated mash bill that's matured in PX. I think that would be really interesting. But overall, I think it deserves a 7. It's a good, easy drinker with a very interesting finish. It tastes very good in both a Manhattan and an old-fashioned. And bottling at 47.5% is pretty good quality. Obviously, some bottled and bond releases are lower priced than that and a higher alcohol. But for those of you out there that don't want to put money into bigger companies' pockets, then this is kind of ideal. I believe, on the subject of bigger companies, that Pernod Ricard now either own shares in this or, well, to distribute it, they must own shares in it. So that's the only reason it's that available in the UK. But nonetheless, it is showing off a more unique, smaller distillery. But overall, I give it a 7. But yes, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.